am one voice that stands alone. I get one choice to man the throne. Stand guard and take shots, give it all I got. All I got is this microphone.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of Pulp Revelators. We decided to get together on this episode to discuss one of our favorite writers, well, at least some of us, most of us. Every one of us enjoyed the last book that we discussed, that I will be posting that episode actually very shortly, so you might get a twofer. But we're going to go ahead and discuss Mr. Miracle by Tom King. Just a little bit of background. Mr. Miracle is a character that comes from the fourth world that was originally created by Jack Kirby, who at one point in time became very dissatisfied with his original publisher, Marvel, because he was creating all these characters but received no rights to any of the characters and became very upset at that point. And there was a big fallout between him and Stan Lee, who together they created the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, just so many different characters. And at this point, he had left in the middle of doing some Thor stories, and he was writing this series called Tales of Asgard, and it was left unfinished. And so at that point, he took some of the stories that he was planning for that. He moved to Marvel's rival, DC Comics, and took some of the stories that he originally had planned for Tales of Asgard and repurposed them into the New Gods. And his original storyline was warring factions of the gods of Asgard that would lead to Ragnarok and the end of all things. So he took that concept and took it to DC and created the fourth world that was introduced in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. I don't know the original issue off the top of my head, but
jeez, I mean, why are you bothering doing the intro then?
it was originally introduced in that, and then that continued on with stories of the New Gods, and then there was Mr. Miracle, the Forever People, and the New Gods. And so those four series ran in conjunction with one another, and even though they could be read separately, they were also could be read as one large crossover prior to a time that these huge crossover events always happened, or these huge crossover books. And you could read them all together into one story that he planned to be finite. It wasn't supposed to be an ongoing story. He had planned an end, but the books got canceled prior to him being able to end it. And there's more of a story about that we can get into later, about how he did eventually come back and end it in the graphic novel. But obviously the story continued on. It's been picked up by many writers. Jim Starlin, then Steve Englehart wrote the New Gods. Jim Starlin wrote the New Gods. Grant Morrison wrote a bunch of stories in the early aughts featuring the New Gods, and then to this most recent series, and there have been others in between them that I'm forgetting, but this most recent one that we're focusing on is Mr. Miracle by Tom King.
And King actually is co-writing the New Gods movie that they're going to be putting out whenever movies get back around. They haven't entered production yet. I haven't heard who I don't know if it's been cast, but I know they have pulled in King, and probably because Mr. Miracle did so well and won tons of Eisners and was loved by everybody but Jeff. But
okay,
just give you a hard time. But there's I don't have the familiarity with the whole New Gods mythology in Fourth World, but I figured before reading this, I remember I wanted to read Jack Kirby's Mr. Miracle, which is one of those. There are exclamation points after every sentence. Everything is larger than life. Everything is just, and he's literally escaping from things where Tom King always comes with an existential angle. So, you're escaping, death figuratively, but also one life to the other. And, as we were saying a little bit prior to coming on, this kind of Mr. Miracle is just a trip. You know, you're trying to figure out what's real and what's not. You know, who's real and and what reality is you're supposed to go to. And you just feel like there's a little bit of haunting going on here too. So the character's own personal mythology is coming back up at different times as memories. And it's not a linear read that you just come to the end and go, oh, that was a great story. You know, it sits with you a little differently.
Yeah. I did take the time to Google it since I should have done this before our episode, but Jack Kirby actually introduced the New Gods back in 1971 with, I think it was just called New Gods #1. And so that was the one you forgot, Gary.
But the premise, you know, and King kind of lays this out too. You've got, you know, warring factions, as Gary said, of gods. You have good versus evil. And in this battle, in order to kind of come to peace, they take, you know, God's son, you know, who's the High Father, and Dark Side, who's basically the evil incarnate. And in order to create peace, they switch the kids to, you know, to be raised by the other, so that, you know, and so you end up with this kind of nature versus nurture. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Who, you know, what, and what character are you looking for to be, you know, the next God or the Son of God? So, trippy. I'm curious what you've got, Dustin.
I had a hard time reading it, I think, because you get to the end and you don't. At least for me, I didn't realize that he actually died.
Gonna need you guys a little closer.
Yeah, there we go.
Bring it in.
This is just how tall I am. I'm actually standing up. I didn't realize he died until like the very end. It was kind of like a Bruce Willis thing, or not Bruce Willis, but you know,
Spoiler alert
kind of thing. I was just like, what? Oh, he actually succeeded in suiciding himself, right?
Okay. Since Dustin jumped to that, I almost called him Dustin. But since he jumped to that, let's go ahead and focus on the end first, which is doable in this storyline. Is that how everybody interpreted it? Did you interpret it as he was dead?
I didn't actually.
Okay.
Say that again, Mike.
I did not. I mean, but I think you kind of wonder that all throughout, because the way it starts, you know, that's to say that you've got an opening scene of a comic book where the superhero, and you know, it's a superhero comic book, right? And the superhero is, you know, in the bathroom having just tried to commit suicide, which is not how most superhero stories start. And so you kind of have this game all along the way, you know, what is real? Did he die early on or did he not? You know, I guess I sort of didn't take it that way. But yeah, you know, love to hear other people's thoughts on it.
Well, because what's the glitches then? You know, what's the glitches with reality that he's having? You know, especially at the end, it seemed like all the glitches were coming together. Like he's sitting, you know, he's propped his legs up on Dark Side, or he's, you know, talking with Orion again, or so help me interpret.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of viewed those glitches as, in his mind, he's dealing with a lot of reality he has to face. And when you have all those multiple glitches at the end, I feel like it was his mind forcing him to come to terms with who he was and who he decided to be, you know, because he's a god in the outer realm, and yet here he is in the inner realm. He's a human with a baby and another one on the way, and he's trying to figure out whether he wants to sell his town to him or not. So he's got to come to terms with a lot of who he is. It's kind of how I took it. I could be totally wrong about that, but that's just kind of the way I took it.
You know, we've talked about another King book in Heroes of Crisis, and and I think you've got that PTSD, you've got Mr. Miracle, Scott Free, dealing with his past and all the different things that he's come through. And, there's a scene that I love where they're both talking, and I guess there's plot spoilers all through this, but for us, Darkseid, in order to end the war, says, all right, I'll give up everything, if you give me my grandson, give me your child. And then that starts the whole that loop again. Like, okay, are we just going to repeat this cycle and go right back to what happened? Or are they going to make a different decision? And Scott Free, Mr. Miracle, saying, well, we came through it all right. And Barda's question back to him is, did we? Did we come through it okay? I mean, clearly they're tainted and messed up and having all kinds of issues. And so them making a different decision for their child and their relationship, and breaking with the past and breaking the cycle, that was pretty cool to me.
I'm gonna like Tom King said, you didn't need the background necessary to this, but it does help a little bit. So I'm gonna go into a little bit more history, and to include just like the motivations of the writer. So when you go back and look at the time that this was originally created, again, I'm gonna go back to Jack Kirby. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I'm kind of a fan of Jack Kirby's. But this was one of his most personal works. He was a soldier. He was Jewish. He grew up in a really hard Jewish neighborhood and made everything of himself, just by himself. He made it. And when he reached the epitome of his dream, a comic creator for his family, which he always wanted to do, it was essentially taken away from him by the company he was working for, or at least that's how he felt. It's well documented that the breakup wasn't a good breakup. He wasn't like, they didn't part ways like, woohoo. So he's come into this series that he's creating basically raw just from previous ideas. And he's bringing all that into it. And then creates Scott Free. And Scott Free is, if you look at his character, there were some Christian concepts, which I think he freely admitted in this, especially with the creation of Scott Free. Scott Free was like the Christ character. He's literally the son of God. High Father was like the high God of all the new gods. And then he was sacrificed for the greater good. Now, he was given the dark side. Now, this, different from Christ, there was no choice in it for him. It's like his destiny was always decided for him, which, you can still argue some more Christ-like qualities. Christ's destiny was this. But then, like, you look at this, there's even a bigger clue at how personal this storyline was for him. And Mr. Miracle was the primary book, even though it's the fourth world and they're the new gods and all that. Mr. Miracle was the book that you read. You could say, all right, that one has heart. I mean, the original series ends with the marriage of him and Big Barda. So, and it's actually kind of documented that Big Barda is literally in character and almost everything except for size, basically based on Roz Kirby, his wife. So their relationship is based on Jack Kirby's. Now, I don't know if she would slap him down and say, stand up again. That'd be neat to see. But I did go ahead and hunt down a picture of her, and let's see if I can do this. The host won't let me screen share. So
let me see if I can change that.
All right. So there's that. So there was that going into the series, and then in interviews with Tom King.
Try again, buddy.
This is a neat. Okay. So now that I can share, let's see, share screen. All right. So there, I don't know if you guys can see it or hear me.
Mm-hmm.
We
can hear you.
There's a young Jack Kirby and his wife, Roz.
Big Barda.
Yep. So I just thought that was kind of a neat little trivia piece. So then you read interviews with Tom King moving into the story, and he was in a really dark place. He never really explained exactly what it was, but there were things from childhood that were affecting him. And then he also isn't happy with the world how it is right now. I mean, you know, we might be able to relate to that while he wrote this story. So he did his research, as of course you can tell, and a big part of the New God story, and I swear I'll be quick and let someone else speak, but I can dominate this whole entire discussion. I got to be careful, is the anti-life equation. The whole mission of the original story of Darkseid was to find the anti-life equation so he could take over everything. And the way it was originally written is that it is it's a formula for total control of everything, and that's what he's searching for. And it's always existed on Earth, whether it be in pieces. And you know, different writers have kind of exemplified it in different ways, but the writer who really kind of did an amazing job of it was Grant Morrison, and this is his version of the anti-life equation. Loneliness plus alienation plus fear plus despair plus self-worth divided by mockery divided by condemnation divided by misunderstanding times guilt times shame times failure times judgment to the nth power equals y, where y equals hope and n equals folly, love equals lies, life equals death, and self equals dark side.
Wow.
I was told there'd be no math in this episode.
So it can be said that Scott and his and you know the suicide at the beginning of the story, since Dustin went to the end, let's start at the beginning real quick. The suicide at the beginning of the story, it can be argued that in his despair and his boredom, and all the reasons he had discussed throughout the book for doing it, whether he wanted to find something new to escape from or whether he was bored with his life, it can be argued that he was infected with the anti-life equation at that point. Basically an equation that's telling you that life isn't worth living, which you would give up ultimate control of your life if you honestly believe that. So throughout the book, as you see those dark side it's always kind of during a moment or after a moment of where he's had great hope and been happy, and then suddenly that appears, and it's almost like it's the anti-life equation popping back up to remind him dark side is. And you know, it appears throughout the book at opportune moments. So it was like all planned and kind of amazing when you look at it.
There's also a scene at the end where he's come to terms with who he is and the life that he has with big part in. The TV remote goes missing. And as tragic as that is, her only response is dark side is. Like, so everything bad that happens, there's your sign, you know.
I'm starting
it out there.
The funny thing is, the two things with you, if you look at the results of this book in popular culture, Dark Side is on mug. It's all kinds of you know, interesting things have happened with that, and then Batman Kills Babies are the two, you know, kind of funny things. And that story is the Jacob Free in his crib. You know, they're told you can't put stuff in the crib, and he has a Batman, and they put a Batman in there. But Batman doesn't kill babies. No, yes, Batman kills babies. They take it out of it. So great bumper sticker.
Well, another thing that I contemplate when reading this is, you know, the idea in society that if only someone had those same opportunities or been born into a different life, you know, some kids never have a chance. You know, and this is kind of one of those stories where they're switched at birth, and you see what happens when one is provided everything and the other one is not, or is treated totally different than the other one. But at the same time, you also see how you have to have the right heart too, where the the brother was kind of pompous and full of himself, and dark side's air. And then you have Scott, where he's just trying to get through the chaos in his life, but he has the heart and the strength. I mean, he got through. He was raised on torture. He was raised on all the horrible things you can go through, and he gets through all of that. He does take that run at suicide, but coming out of that, I mean, the book kind of expresses time and time and time again where they're outnumbered, they're overmatched, and he just soldiers on because it's what he does. It's what Mr. Miracle does, and he has the heart to push through. And I think that's important because at the very end, I think Tom King actually gave this book or the story.
Freezing.
Gary, could you complete his thought, please?
I was like totally engrossed, and all of a sudden he's like,
movie where he's just
Tim, we lost.
We'll get back to Tim.
It is a beautiful picture.
I think one of the things when when your mind dances between pop culture, there's a thing with Darkseid in a late confrontation that remind me of the Conan the Barbarian movie where James Earl Jones and Conan and Schwarzenegger had this confrontation, and Jones basically says, everything in your life you owe to me because I've put you through all this and made you the person you are today. And Mr. Miracle and Darkseid are fighting, and Darkseid says, you were given the greatest gift one can receive. You were given pain. Pain makes you steady, strong, able to conquer. But what did you do with all your pain? Performed, married, right? You didn't use it right. So that whole idea of this horrible, terrible, torturous upbringing was to strengthen you and to make you into this, this great person through these trials.
Johnny Cash has a song, A Boy Named Sue.
There you go.
Where, the father names his son Sue, and he talks about having to grow up with a girl's name, and then finally he's in a Tennessee bar and he runs into his dear old dad, and they get into a fist fight and they're brawling out, and like right before Sue's about to kill his father says like the same thing. He's like, I knew I wasn't going to be around. I was going to be a deadbeat. So I needed to make sure that you're going to make it in this world and be tough. So I named you Sue.
There you have it. Scott Free, a.k.a. Sue.
Tim, we lost you.
I'm curious where you were going with, what Tom King gave to.
So the storyline at the end, I felt like there was good closure there where, even at the end there where he's got all these people fading his life, it's happening quickly and more substantially. And even the last guy, it's kind of like that scene in the last Harry Potter book or movie where Dumbledore's with Harry Potter, and he's like, well, of course this is all in your head. It doesn't mean it's not happening. I kind of had that perspective when I'm reading it, where he's rationalizing and coming to terms. And even at the very end, when he's sitting on the couch with his wife, he's kind of talking about, man, I just had this crazy thing happen. Like as soon as we came home, and here's what happened. And yeah, we're good. Like he's finally checked into life, and I'm just going to motor through. And I think that's an overwhelming theme in his book that a lot of people could use.
Well, and as King does too, there's just so much of this kind of meta picking at the comic book narratives and form, and this whole idea of what is it, you've got the superhero reality, and all that's happening, and at the same time you've got the domestic reality of having a baby and having and remodeling and all the different things, and dealing with a kind of a con man spin guy who is trying to always set up funky flashman, so that you just all these societal pressures and you're never I think, Jeff, your remark early on, I'm not sure what I just read, I think that's part of the point. You know, you don't know how to feel comfortable because you're jarred from one reality to the next, and largely you're figuring out, hey, that's okay, you know, to go back and forth between these. And if getting married, having kids, you know, is an adventure in and of itself, you know, don't have to have this like great adventure, new God's life, you know, in order to have, you know, the redeeming love that breaks the cycle and resets your life in a different way, where you have a different choice that you can make.
Which he does in the book. You know, he's offered all these opportunities, and the anti-life equation, it's kind of making him choose between heaven and hell each time. And then it kind of puts him in an inescapable trap. All right, so to make peace, you have to give up your son, the dark side, like you were raised. So all the tortures that you went through, you have to now do it. You know, almost like, you know, when God asked Job to give up his son and sacrifice his son. So another correlation there. However, instead of going along with it, Mr. Miracle's like, yeah, world peace does sound really good by giving up my son, but I'm just going to kill you and keep him. And, you know, and it's another instance where Big Barda and he come together, and they're able to save his son. So, well, I'll get more on that later, but it's kind of like then it changes to a story of father and son. And I am looking even more ghostly as this time's going on. I think my camera's just dying.
It's all the smoke in your room.
It is. I am hotboxing right now.
Yeah, I think something else that I've lost my track that quick. Hold on, I had it.
All right.
Nope, it's gone. Continue, Gary.
One of the things that you say, you know, his response to dark side, his response to his whole legacy, his response to, you know, you're going to carry on the same way that, you know, that has always been done. There's a pretty big moment in the book and in a couple different places where "fu" is the shout back, the existential, just not having it, not doing that way, going to do it my own way, which is super powerful thing to say in the face of the devil or the face of, you know, your father. You know, there's a scene later on where High Father and he are you know, or the ghost of High Father or something, they're having this conversation and he's just like, I'm not listening to you guys. I'm doing it my way. You know, so there we go from Johnny Cash to Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
I think too, you know, so he's given up at a young age for this peace, this cosmic peace or whatever it is. And the side on the good side would have been content to let that play out and see what happens. But at the same time, there was no peace because Darkseid was always pushing for the edge and what he needed to end the world and take control and develop it into what he wanted it to be. That's kind of what we have going on in the world, where we have, you know, good is content to let everything thrive, and, you know, except for evilness. Everything is good. We'll leave everybody alone. But evil is never content. Evil always wants to destroy. Evil always wants to impose its will. And we have a lot of that in the world, especially these last 2 or 3 decades, where, you know, you get a little bit of peace and then it's just an explosion of evil. And then you get a little bit of peace and it's a bigger explosion of evil. Yeah, and it's pretty cool that that's in the book and it's underlined the whole time through the entire book. And it's all about, you know, someone who was supposed to be bad saying no, and I'm going to live my life differently. And not only am I going to live it differently, I'm going to fight what I was raised to embrace.
Yeah, and
Tim, like you say, I think that's that the good person put in a bad situation who won't succumb, who won't give in, and who, you know, whether it's through, you know, his upbringing of always trying to escape, you know, and just saying, I'm not going to just, you know, be pulled down into this, which then becomes his, you know, livelihood in one way, shape, or form, is that continuing to escape.
Exactly. And, you know, that's how he keeps beating the odds. He keeps going on. despite letting it defeat him. In fact, Dustin, you brought it up earlier, the glitchy stuff. Another interpretation of that is notice what all the where the glitches happen. It's when it's someone who has an expectation of him that he doesn't want, or when it's like Granny Goodness, the woman who tortured him growing up, but somehow in her mind loved him.
Right.
You know, so it's always it's always the things he's trying to escape. The original Mr. Miracle series ended with him and Barda getting married and leaving the war. He didn't take over for Highfather like he was supposed to. He didn't do any of that. He married another soldier that was raised on Apocalypse, and they left. So he never wanted any of that. He never wanted to be the soldier for New Genesis. He never wanted to be any of the things that were being placed on him. He just wanted to live with his wife. And then in the middle of that, he's given he has the child. At least in this storyline, he has Jacob Free. And that gives him the impetus to fight. So he's able to fight on even more because he has this child that he wants to raise with his wife. And it's a great story. And the whole glitches and the artwork, I mean, kudos to Mitch Gerards, man. He just...
Oh, dude.
Oh, it's amazing what he brings out in that book, and just the whole idea with the glitches and all. So I mean, there's so much to unravel from this book. It's kind of amazing when you really do a deep dive into it.
And I think you've got to, if you start looking at, writer artist combos like Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, or, you've got Donny Cates and Stegman, and you've got to go King and Gerard's. They just work so well together. Everything from, Sheriff of Babylon to here to parts of Heroes in Crisis and some of the Batman stuff. I mean, they're a great team.
Yeah, they are. Well, even Sheriff of Babylon, I think that's they worked on that together.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's there's something that I found in a Punisher book that Mitch Gerards drew that I really want to ask him where he got the idea for it. But so if I ever do, and I'll tell you guys what it is if I ever get an answer. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to sit there in suspense.
Okay. There's lots of cool,
Gary
just
is.
dialogue. I mean, you've got Scott Free and Barda, sitting out off on the beach off of the, out of the amusement park and talking about Descartes and whether or not we exist. I mean, and King is just, always famous for this kind of stuff. There's a great line. They're coming into LA, later on, and they're talking about this kind of trap of, people come out like to LA, people come to LA, people come here because they think they have to. Then they don't leave because they can't. Once they've gotten there, they can't leave. And Barda says, after everything, haven't you learned by now that's all love is? You're like, oh, and then the next scene is home. And so there's so many interplays of things where you can just kind of sit back and go, I'm not exactly sure what's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a book that I would say I understood it more on this read than I did the first time through it. The first time through it, it was kind of like I was like, whoa. But I also kind of felt the same way about Heroes in Crisis as well, that we talked about. And this has actually inspired me. I want to go back and reread his entire Batman too, because that's one of the things I really like about Tom King. I really like Tom King because of his background and everything. His service. He takes these big superhero. He takes this guy who's making his own words up. Now he takes this big superheroic story. Sometimes, following Jack Kirby, you can't out cosmic story Jack Kirby. You just can't. And then even I'll go as far as one of the follow-ups to Jack Kirby was Jim Starlin, who created Thanos. He wrote New Gods for a while, and you can't out cosmic that guy either. I mean, you're talking about two legends when it comes to these cosmic stories. And so he took these really big, lofty, in some ways personal to both him and the original creator, cosmic concepts, and he wrote a story with this. Well, I'll focus on this first, but he wrote a story with Mr. Miracle that took all these huge concepts, these huge metaphysical concepts, and made them very personal. Like you feel it's very internalized and personal to the character, but yet in the same theme with the same concepts. He did the same with, he did the same with his run on Batman. He took this heroic story, this detective story, all these different things that happened during his incredibly long run that still is going to continue with Batman and Catwoman. And he made it a very personal story for the character. Again, with Heroes in Crisis, same concept. He took, it's a superhero story. And when you attach crisis to it, you're like, oh man. And he made it a very personal story for the character involved, which if you want to know what I'm talking about, you're just going to have to listen to our other podcast. I'm sorry. Shameless plug time. But, and it doesn't always end the way you want it to, nor does it always end with closure, which is real. So he takes these lofty comic concepts, but yet at the same time includes real life. Real life doesn't always end with a satisfying closure to the story. Plus, there's more story to come, like he says at the end. And this is just that particular reality at that time.
There's a kind of running, Twitter joke that Tom King plays into, and in considering a story like, okay, who is he? How can I make him sad? And can he stare out a window into the rain? Kind of thing, because there's always this, inherent sadness of whatever's going on. And this, just this angst. You get the sense from Scott Free, who, by virtue of Highfather dying, becomes God. And he's got a great line where, he's just kind of in this uncertain place. And he says, I'm a God. I'm supposed to know things. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything, and I mean, man, I feel that every day,
So that's how I read this.
Yeah.
I read this whole thing as a midlife crisis.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think
100%.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's just because I'm going through my own midlife crisis.
Woo!
But I read it as it's kind of like he did what he was doing coming out of Kirby, leaving the work, getting married, having a baby, all that stuff. Performing. Mm-hmm. But it almost, there's that scene in there where Barda kind of challenges him head on and is like, were you trying to escape from me?
Right.
And it's like this, he's trying to figure out. And that's kind of how I read the first, second, third, fourth world kind of thing, was that's almost like a man's journey or a human's journey is the first world being you're learning from what your parents grew up in and what they're trying to escape from. And the second world is what you actually grow up in. So you still have these things in the back of I don't know. I mean, we all have it. Our parents were trying to escape from their parents and what they believed, and the same thing. And then the third world is us doing it. We're coming out, but then that fourth world is actually saying, all right, I'm free from all this.
That's imagination.
And it goes to the ultimate question of what is the good life? And I think that's probably top three of the, most important philosophical questions that's ever been discussed by, the greats. But it's the question that subconsciously we are asking ourselves every day.
Yep.
And I think that's what at least that's how I interpret what he's trying to do, is he's trying to interpret that as, he's asking himself, what is the good life? Is the good life the married life that I have is the good life. You know, maybe hearing Gary say he's going back to try and fix all the expectations or failures he has is the good life, going back and taking away all the regrets, or is the good life now saying, F that, I'm going to do what I want.
Well, and that's the beauty of the story is I'm assuming that you're spot on based on some of the interviews I've read, is they're not mutually exclusive. That's also a part of it. Like say what you said again about the fourth world.
Like the fourth world is like, you know, so the third world, I see it as like that kind of 20s, early 30s kind of life where you're like, all right, I'm going to do what everybody else does. I'm going to get married, find the job, you know, and maybe I'm speaking from this experience. Like at 30 years old, I found the woman of my dreams. I have amazing kids. I've planted a church in what everybody thought was the hardest area on the shore. Like I accomplished my dreams, you know, and now I'm like, oh, what's next now? You know, what do I do next? And so I'm like in this like existential, like, do I want to do this for 30 years? You know, what is going to happen? And that fourth world is finally saying, all right, I've accomplished kind of what everybody should accomplish in life. But now what do I want to actually live as? Sort of what he's saying at the end of this book. Yeah.
And there's this brilliant scene that Dustin helps, you know, and it's young Scott Free, you know, kind of drawing. It says, and the son asked, what is the fourth world? And the father said, the first world is the old world, the world of my parents from which they fled. So that's your first world, you know, the old world of the parents. The second world is the new world, which they sought, which they found, where I came to be. So, you know, second world. The third world is our world, as it is now, in the making, the future being born. So, and then the fourth world, my child, that is my world, the world I see when I close my eyes. It's like, oh man, that's just a goosebump line of that, you know, what's inside you that you want to bring into being. When you close your eyes, what do you see that doesn't involve anybody else's world?
Yeah, Aristotle says we all have a vision of the good life. You know, none of us are living the good life now because we have something, which, you know, the anti-life equation is really just the killer of hope, right? The good life is really, what are you hoping towards?
Right. The anti-life equation can be argued to be those doubts that crop into our head every time we're approaching what we consider to be the good life.
Yeah.
And then like, so that's why where, you know, people say he's dead at the end. It can be argued that maybe he's not. Maybe he's in the trap that he turned into the fourth world for himself. Because at the end, he's where he wants to be. He's with the loving wife, with his son, with his, you know, that's the world.
He's a god. Can God die? I mean, what's to say that he didn't die a couple of different times and this is the current life he's living. It's almost like the first, second, third, and fourth world. This is the world I've created for myself.
That's the real Barta.
My world.
That would be the question I have. Is that the real Barta that's with him in all this, you know?
That's because she pulls him out of the, you know, of his various places where he gets kind of stuck.
Yeah.
She's like, you know, kind of smacks him into reality a bit.
Yeah.
She does that in the original material too. It's so funny because like when you look at the character, she's a warrior raised, a warrior born. So like when it comes to she's like soft and can be supportive in all the stories I read, but then when it reaches a point where she's like, smack, man up, you know. So which we all need at times. But that's also vague, and he purposely leaves vague. And right at the time that this story took off was right when Rebirth happened. So all the new 50. So what
happened?
DC Rebirth. So 52 was trans. What's the word I'm looking for? Becoming DC Rebirth, and at the end of the new 52, the Dark Side War that Jeff Johns had written, they defeated Darkseid. Spoiler alert, by the way. And part of getting the assistance to defeat Darkseid, Barda had to make a deal with the female Furies that she would go back to Apocalypse with them and serve on Apocalypse. So moving into this story, it could be kind of argued that he's separated by Barda and that's not the real Barda. But then at the same time, it could be. You don't know. It's kind of odd that, you know, one of the things that kind of leads toward it might be his perfect vision of Barda in this perfect world that he's now found himself in, because her eyes keep changing color.
Mm.
So there's a lot of vagueness that's left up to interpretation. The way I choose to see it personally, because that's the most important, is that she's not. He's in this anti-life equation, afterlife world he's turned and envisioned for himself, and this is his perfect version of his wife, which is pretty close to how she's always been characterized. So, you know, I'm lucky. I live in a world where I live with the perfect version of my wife.
Nice.
Since this is being recorded, you know, that's important for you to say, but
well, she was listening. She was watching. But
and I can't find. I mean, they bring it out in places where it's outright said, "Is it hell? Did he escape? Is it paradise? Did he decide to stay?" I mean, there's so many places where you just kind of you're.
Yeah, but isn't that also depending on his mindset too? I mean, maybe utopia is not where he wanted to be. Maybe he wanted to be where there was a struggle. You know, I mean, you never know. Some people thrive on chaos. You know, the idea that, you know, Barda is just a version of his perfect wife, who keeps him in check, tells him off when he needs to be told off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it to me, it's just, I don't know. It's kind of hard to put in words.
Yeah.
But if he is living in an alternate reality, or just stuck in an equative type person situation where he can't quite move forward, move sideways, move backwards, and like that, and he's just stuck there. He has an interesting version of perfect, because he's going through struggles all the time. I mean, like I said earlier, fighting against all odds, always being outnumbered. And then you have the pressures of real life, like family and stuff getting in the way and all that happening. I mean, to me, my perfect life would remove at least a little bit of that chaos.
Mm.
And if it is his version of the way he thinks his life should go, man, he's chewing on a lot of baggage.
Well, you know, and a lot of these are autobiographical with King to a degree, you know, who was a CIA operative, you know, who realized that he can't be all in for the CIA when he's got kids at home and he's got, you know, and not wanting to just abandon. So that's a push-pull that goes on with him too, in that, you know, when he decided to join the CIA, it was post 9/11 that said, I'm going to go in and I'm going to help, you know. So I think you can always find him inserted into what's going on. And there's actually a scene with him and Gerard's right in the book, you know, sitting as fans and in the audience in places. Yeah, I don't know. I like Gary, this is my second time reading it through. And actually, I think each one that we've done so far, you know, I reread Born Again. I reread The Ultimates and reread and every time you're like, man, there's so much more here that I've forgotten I read the first time. And that's the sign of a book that's going to endure. You know, 6 months from now, I can pick it up again and go, oh man, that's right. I've forgotten all this stuff in it.
So Dustin, you were talking about the glitches, and it was a really good example. And you also mentioned him putting his feet on Darkseid, but it's kind of like a really good example of how the glitches like represent those doubts in himself and those things that try to drag him down. You kind of like we are when we're walking through our daily walks, and there are things in the world that rip us from our focus. And I love it because it's after they've defeated Darkseid. He's where he wants to be, and it's right there on that page. Like, look, he's with his son, enjoying himself, and there's a glitch of Darkseid sitting on the couch with him. And instead of giving in and being like, oh man, there's Darkseid, he's like, just don't put my feet on him. So, he just takes his worries and his fears and all that crap, and he's like, makes a good place to prop my feet.
Well, and now, like thinking about it, I think I want to flip back, and I think he's alive. And I think when the scene that
I knew you were going to say that.
The scene that you pointed out to, where the bug leader who did die, and he's like, "Oh, you're in hell." I think I was reading that as for sure, like, oh, he did die. But now, like looking back and thinking of the glitches, like, I think he is alive. The bug's just not describing that he's in literal hell,
right?
But because he still hasn't escaped the struggles that come with life, they're still there. But he has a new focus, like Darkseid still is in the back of his mind, but maybe it's Darkseid was.
Well, see, I take that scene with Darkseid on the couch, meaning he's never going away. Darkseid still is, like that's, he's always going to be his. Speaking of which, you say Darkseid and Thanos, and it always makes me laugh how similar they look to one another. And so that's really the crossover battle that you need is Darkseid versus Thanos.
Yeah.
That'd be
not Darkseid versus the Anti-Monitor.
Well, put the two heavy bad guys against each other.
Wow.
What's really neat with what you said, Mike, is the same thing can be said about your self-doubts. Even things that you've conquered years ago, they're always lying under the surface. They're always sitting there, waiting for you to trip again. And that's a good representation of that throughout everything. I mean, his whole mission is to completely subvert you to him. So are our vices. So are the things that are there to knock us off of our pedestal. All of that. It's the same concept. Those type of things can take you over, just like the character of Darkseid wants to in the storyline.
It's very much like what we read in Daredevil Born Again. It's kind of there's a similar theme there of he could let fear and just absolute suffering take over, but he doesn't. He pushes through.
I think we all have that in us. You have to choose to get up and get out of bed. You have to choose to move on when life is difficult. Have you guys ever seen that motivational speech by he's a ranking middle? I think he's an admiral, but he talks about making your bed, like getting up and getting moving. And we all have to face that. We have to face that. When we have any issues, teenage kids have to worry about peer pressure, finishing reports, even publicly having to look the right look and things like that. And, we all have those struggles of do we keep going or do we throw in the towel? And we're living in a society now where a lot of people are throwing in the towel. You look at the extreme increase in diagnosis of bipolar and other mental disorders and things like that. And, we live in a world where sadly people they're throwing in the towel, they're giving up. They don't have a lot of hope in them. So, I think everybody could relate to that. We all have moments where we don't want to get out of bed, or we don't want to have that conversation. We don't want to go to that place, but sometimes we don't have a choice.
Word.
That's true. There's also, that the whole Darkseid is aspect of it man, there's some, terrible stuff that I think sometimes it's nothing new under the sun, but, kids get utterly confused and don't, always have guidance to help pull them through things. They, they're just, and it's just, I look at it frequently now and I think about, my daughter's growing up. I'm like, man, I am glad I'm not growing up right now. Mm-hmm. Just because, the choices and the, life is basically being recorded everywhere they are. and all these different kinds of aspects of life, you know, the pressures that they face. You know, when we were at home, when I was at home after a day of school, you know, you had one phone in the house. And so when you were up in your room, you're in your room, and you didn't have to worry about what everybody, you know, now social media, there's never an off switch for kids. Even when they put their phone down, they're worried, you know, about what people are saying, what's going on. And yeah, I don't know. But I hear you, Tim. It is always that, you know, decision. Are you going to get up, you know, are you going to, you know, make that call? I think about all the ghosts that kind of haunt Scott-free throughout the story. And it makes me think of a line or a situation in Cheers where Woody and Fraser Crane are talking to each other. And Woody's talking about, you know, he says, yeah, but, you know, back in wherever he was, I can't think of what his hometown was that he always used to talk about. French Lick was one of them, but I think that's where Larry Bird was supposed to have been from. And he says, you know, how we deal with things, oh, we don't talk about it. You know, we don't really bring it out. We just push it down and just push it down and just push it down, you know, and just, you know, and Fraser Crane just walks by and goes, tick, tick, tick. Because I think that's that, you know, if you don't deal with the ghosts, if you don't deal with that stuff, you know, sooner or later it's coming back for, you know, on you.
So I wanted to take a minute to just look at some of the supporting characters in the book, outside of Barda and his son and Darkseid and Highfather, you know, outside of everyone. No, there's Orion and Forager and Metron.
And Light Ray.
Light Ray.
And Light Ray.
Funky Flashman.
Yeah. But I personally want to know. Let's look at Orion. Orion is the son of Darkseid. He's the actual birth son of Darkseid. That in that whole trade that Mike described earlier, he was sent to New Genesis to be raised. So he was raised in paradise, while Highfather's actual son was raised in hell, Apocalypse. So basically, Orion is the guy who wants to be scot-free. He wants to be the real son of Highfather. He loves Highfather, the man who raised him. Takes over for him when Scott won't. And so he always has that, because he was born of Darkseid, he can never be that pure scot-free. I mean, scot-free was taken completely out of his environment and raised on Apocalypse, and still turned out to be this good redeeming character for the most part. Whereas Orion still has Wolverine like savage rages he gets caught in the storylines because of his because of the side of him that's Darkseid. And he's the warrior, he's the killer on the battlefield, meant to kill Darkseid. And so it's probably going to drive him nuts that Scott-Free won't take his destiny, that Scott-Free has found something that he considers better than the duty that Highfather puts before him. And you even see him, he needles him all the time throughout the storyline. He forced him to see hard truths too. Like there's a scene where we're talking about the glitches. It's one of the only scenes I remember, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but where Scott himself actually glitches. Like most of the time it's other characters that glitch, but it's a scene in where Orion is challenging his beliefs and he himself glitches. And it was I can't find it now, but it was a crazy scene that I would show you if I had. Oh, yes. Jeff, am I still allowed to share my screen, or have you blocked my permissions?
No, I believe you can still share.
All right. So, and there it is. So we talked about how the glitches are those like things that are holding him back at times. And look, it's himself. Because these are like, it seems like these are moments where he's really questioning his beliefs. And even at this time, Orion's like, again, your lack of knowledge will not save or condemn you. Only your beliefs can. So it's almost like Orion is part Jiminy Cricket part jerk off older brother.
Definitely the jerk off part comes through loud and clear, I think.
Yeah. And there's even a point where he causes him to break down and Mr. Miracle kicks the crap out of him. So he's almost like that brother that just needles you no matter what because he knows you're the favorite. Kind of like how Jeff is to all of you all because he knows that he's my favorite personally, and even though he's and then you take a look at his actual two Jiminy Crickets kind of were Metron and Forager. They both try to warn him that something's not right, even though they kind of confirm what he feels the entire time that something's not right. They both end up with horrible fates because of it, but they're there. Now, Metron is like, essentially, for lack of better terms, the god of knowledge. Whereas Forager is, you called him Bug, which is great because that's what they call him throughout the entire storylines, even written by Jack Kirby. But he's actually a new god that was orphaned and raised by the Bugs, which the bugs on New Genesis are really weird. They're human-sized, and some of them look human, but they're actually bugs. Sometimes I think that the comic creators do imbibe a little bit when they're coming up with characters, which is kind of interesting. But well, I know some of them do from their interviews, but it's kind of neat where both those characters, and Forager basically has died in every storyline that I think he's been in, except for his own book that I really want to check out. That was written by Gerard Way and drawn by Mike Allred. It was just came out in the past few years, and it's called Bug. But it's those two characters were kind of neat because they are always this. In a way, they've been the ex machinas of previous stories. They've come in and they've been that foil that gives them what they need to suddenly defeat the villains. Metron, who's kind of I wouldn't say he's a good guy either. He's just the god of knowledge. So he may sometimes turn out to be a Loki type of new god, where you can't really decide. But he'll come in certain storylines and be like, "Here's that missing piece you needed to be." Forager just shows up and sacrifices himself. So just kind of interesting the roles that they took in this story.
And I think King has it's interesting. I mean, Gary, you're talking about the supporting characters in this book. And also, often that's kind of what King does a little bit, is take supporting characters, and make them main characters to see what you would do with them. Like this whole thing with Mr. Miracle is really interesting. And then after he finished this one, Adam Strange is the one that he's working on now with Strange Adventures, who's gotten some attention, but has never been like the big hero. And so I think you end up with King, and the same way he took, Kyle Rayner instead of Hal Jordan. I mean, he's always taking like, a character kind of from the
We did the same thing in Heroes in Crisis.
Right, with Booster Gold, and yep. So, it's the sideline guys who then get the spotlight for a little while. But I think you give them a little more creative freedom when it's a guy who people, you make one wrong move with Batman and Superman, you have a whole,
Uproar.
peanut gallery who's going crazy. Oh, you can't, Batman would never do that, Like, oh, great. Okay. But yeah, I have to say there's something to King's books that always introduces something that I hadn't thought about or seen and leaves you thinking differently than when you started. And that's what I look for in writers that I really like. Are you changed having read them? And King is certainly one of those guys. So do we have Skirker? You're muted. So you're
No, I really like how just like you said, King he really throws in a lot of metaphysical as well as reality, and he mixes them really well, and it does. It makes you question. It makes you look at things, and it makes you search. Kind of, you end up searching your own feelings. Search your feelings, Tim.
Yeah.
You end up kind of searching your own feelings.
I think he also takes a lot of the.
Good.
He takes a lot of the typical action-filled comics with small character developments, and he reverses it. Like he focuses on a long-term project of character development with a little bit of action mixed in. Like this book did not have a ton of action. It was more dialogue, interpersonal thought processes. I mean, he really dove into the human psyche. He did the same thing in Heroes in Crisis. There's a lot more action in that, but there was a lot of internal analysis going on there between the different characters that he was using.
Yeah, you need to check out Sheriff of Baghdad too. Like if you really like this, like Sheriff of Baghdad is a really good. I mean,
Yeah, and that's
check out everything he wrote. Seriously.
so. What's our next book?
What's that?
What's our next book of the month?
I was thinking that. I don't know.
Mark Millar. We've done Tom King.
And we've done Frank Miller. I mean, we could, are we looking for a Grant Morrison type deal, or do we go, out of the main name superheroes and go to something like, a Planetary with Warren Ellis, which are not characters that everybody knows. Planetary is an amazing,
Planetary is hard because it's 27 issues, though. Like, would you want to just do the first trade?
Yeah, but that leaves a lot hanging.
I mean, I'm all for reading 27 issues over again. I just don't know about everyone else. I would do that. I would read I've probably read Planetary about 5 times straight through and probably read it again.
I have that. I'm the same way with Planetary. Or we could take Ellis's. It's a single trade that he did for Moon Knight.
Yeah, we haven't really done a lot of Marvel. I mean, we just did Born Again.
Yeah.
No, and then we did Ultimates with Marvel. So
yeah,
one time in DC.
We all at one point agreed on Descender. If we've read that, we could discuss that while we take on one of these bigger projects.
I've not done Descender. I don't know it.
I don't know.
It's Jeff Lemire.
Lemire.
I'd be down. I have the first trade right here if anybody wants to borrow it.
I do too.
Or if you want to get it, I could do Descender.
Should we end the episode as far as the recording goes, and then we'll discuss this.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
So should we do parting shots on Mr. Miracle then?
Yeah. I thought you meant parting shots on each other because I said
that works too.
Well, we need a dynamic duo to squeeze in. Embrace.
I have decided my big takeaway is I need to update my wardrobe to wear all the superhero shirts that Mr. Miracle wears throughout.